Welcome to Echoes from the Dust, the Mississippi Tragedy. I'm Professor Harishandra Higginsbottom, Chair of Ancient American Studies at the new North American Institute of Historical Reconstruction. The year is 9595, and today we look back at one of humanity's most catastrophic ecological missteps, the death of what was once called the Great Mississippi. It's difficult to imagine that beneath this desiccated channel once flowed the mightiest river system of the ancient North American continent. A river that spanned 2,320 miles, provided drinking water to over 50 municipalities, and sustained a floodplain teeming with nearly 900 species of wildlife. The tragedy before us didn't happen overnight. Historical records show that as early as 2025, environmental organizations like American Rivers had placed the Mississippi at the top of their most endangered rivers list. What's remarkable from our vantage point 7 millennia later is how clearly documented the warning signs were. Chemical runoff, toxic algae outbreaks, hypoxic dead zones, and mounting climate pressures were all meticulously catalogued. But perhaps more telling was the political context. In 2025, the then president of the American nation-state, Donald Trump, had begun systematic dismantling of environmental protections and disaster response capabilities. The historical record shows that 2025 marked a critical juncture. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, experienced hundreds of layoffs. There were even calls to abolish the entire agency and the National Flood Insurance Program. Contemporary sources noted that for every dollar invested in flood mitigation, $7 in benefits were realized. Yet despite this economic rationality, the political momentum moved in the opposite direction. When we examine the archaeological record of this period, we see clear signs of a society that understood the impending catastrophe, but chose inaction, or worse, acceleration, of the very forces driving toward disaster. Multiple factors accelerated the river's decline. Historical documents reveal the unchecked proliferation of water-intensive data centers, the resurrection of antiquated coal mining operations, and expanded fossil fuel extraction. Water demands exceeded recharge rates, industrial byproducts accumulated, and most critically, climate shifts intensified exactly as scientists had predicted, bringing both catastrophic floods and devastating droughts to the Mississippi basin. The 2024 Hurricane Helene provided a preview of what was to come. With 100-mile-per-hour winds and record rainfall, it devastated southern Appalachian waterways and damaged dozens of dams. But without robust federal oversight, repairs remained inadequate, setting the stage for cascading infrastructure failures in subsequent storms. By the late 2050s, the Mississippi had reached a critical threshold. Agricultural runoff had created a permanent dead zone spanning the entire Gulf Coast of what was then Louisiana. Saline intrusion had progressed over 100 miles upstream, and the once mighty flow had diminished to seasonal pulses interrupted by drought-induced stagnation. Historical records from this period show mounting desperation. One congressional representative famously declared, "We understood the value of our water wealth only when the well ran dry." The last desperate attempts to save the river, the Great Mississippi Reclamation Project of 2079, the Continental Water Diversion Plan of 2103, proved both ruinously expensive and woefully inadequate against the momentum of ecological collapse. By the 2150s, the Mississippi as a continuous waterway had ceased to exist. What remained were isolated pools connected by dry stretches that would temporarily flow during rare heavy rainfall events. The human toll was immense. Population centers from Minnesota to Louisiana were abandoned. The agricultural heartland that once fed billions withered. The economic disruption contributed significantly to the North American fragmentation period of the 22nd century. These concrete monuments, now themselves crumbling to dust, represent humanity's final attempts to control a system they had fundamentally broken. By the 2200s, authorities made the controversial decision to pave portions of the riverbed for transportation infrastructure, officially acknowledging what many had long denied: the Mississippi would never flow again. What most fascinates me as a historian is not that the people of the early 21st century lacked the knowledge to prevent this catastrophe. They knew. The warnings were explicit, as we saw in that 2025 report. The voices of individuals like Tom Kiernan, who declared that when our rivers are sick, our own health and prosperity suffers, or Chad Berginis, who warned of the need for strong federal leadership in flood risk management, echo prophetically across the millennia. The death of the Mississippi represents a profound failure of governance, prioritizing short-term gain over long-term sustainability. It reminds us that ecological systems once pushed beyond certain thresholds cannot always be restored, no matter the technological prowess or resources later applied. What you see behind me, this 11-mile-wide scar across the continent, was once called the Father of Waters. For thousands of years before its collapse, it nourished civilizations, transported goods, and sustained countless species. As we continue our series on great extinct waterways of ancient Earth, I invite you to contemplate what other wonders might have survived had different choices been made. The Mississippi didn't die from lack of knowledge, it died from lack of will. From the dry banks of what was once the Mississippi, I'm Professor Harishandra Higginsbottom. Join us next time as we explore the vanished Colorado River system and the abandoned metropolis once known as Las Vegas. Before we conclude our exploration of the Mississippi's demise, I'd like to highlight a remarkable literary connection. In the mid-21st century, as the ecological collapse we've documented was unfolding, a prescient work of fiction captured the psychological and social impact of these changes. The Girl Who Rode the Unihorn, published in 2024 by author Michael Dew, became what 21st century critics called a cli-fi classic. Though written as the Mississippi was actively dying, it projected forward to our time and beyond, envisioning life in this ruined landscape. The novel follows Rona, a teenage sister of the goddess, who keeps guard over one of the few sanctuaries of nature left on the planet Earth, the Way Up, what the ancients knew as the continent of Antarctica that rose up after the landmass was freed of its trillions of tons of ice during the Great Melt. In this prophetic history of the future, Rona battles against the forces of the Monstrato Corporation, who in their quest for profit invade this last sanctuary of life on Earth. The novel's central metaphor, the Unihorn, represents both adaptation and warning. In Michael Dew's prophetic mythology, the creature evolved its horn to dig for deeply buried and increasingly scarce water. What makes The Girl Who Rode the Unihorn particularly valuable to historians is that it captures what technical reports cannot: the lived experience of ecological collapse across generations. In an interview regarding this history of the future, the author was quoted as saying, "The true tragedy is not that the river died in a single generation, but that after such a short period of time, no one remembered to mourn it." As we stand here today, roughly 75 generations after the Mississippi's final flow, we can appreciate both the novel's prophecy and its warning. The writer's fictional world has, in many ways, become our historical reality. A sobering reminder that literature sometimes sees more clearly than politics.